Hi, and welcome to a new incubation talk at Dutch Game Garden. My name is Arje Loep, and today we have Matthijs van der Laar from Twirlbound to talk about Twirlbound and Pine. Matthijs, welcome.
Thank you. Hi.
Can you quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, so I'm Matthijs. I'm the creative director at Twirlbound. We are a startup, or at least we founded ourselves in 2013 already, during a school program in Breda in the Netherlands, to make entertainment games. And we ended that school program with a prototype for our first big game, which is called Pine, and that came out last year in October.
And that was, you just said the startup or the foundation was in 2013.
Yeah, although, the first 2 years was more to test the waters, because we wanted a safe space in which we could experiment with what is it like to have a company in the Netherlands, and doing taxes and explore all of that without having to earn your money immediately with it. Yeah. We thought that going out of school, creating a company immediately would have been too daunting and scary for us. So we did that while we were at school, and we didn't do much and make much. Most of the tax reports were just $0 every 3 months, $0. But at least we had the sense and the rhythm of that. So we founded it a bit early, and then the first game we published was in 2015, which was a super small mobile game, a puzzler. It didn't make much money, but that was okay because we were still in school. We just wanted to have that under our belts. And then we ended that school program with what should be the first big one.
All right. And how many people is that again?
Well, we founded it with 2.
Okay.
Then in 2015, we were with 3 to have because I'm a designer and producer by trade, and then my companion is a programmer. And then we needed someone for the art, basically the 3D art. So he joined in 2015 to create that game.
On an equal share basis?
Yeah-ish.
Somewhat.
I mean, it was a VOF, so a vennootschap.
Okay.
It was equal, but to be honest, I'm the only one who really cares about the business side of things. Great. Which is interesting because you have some companies that have all the entrepreneurs together, and then it becomes a bit of a hassle sometimes. And for us, they just entrusted me with the business part of it, which meant that they could focus on the creative side of things, so that never gave any conflicts or whatever. So we were at 3 in 2015, and then in 2016, when it was time to graduate and we wanted to start Pine, that's when we found 2 other people to join us, so an animator and a character artist. Mm-hmm. That was the bare minimum of what we needed to make a 3D action-adventure game. Yeah. And then 2 more people joined us over the course of Pine, so now we're with 7.
7. And you just introduced yourself as the creative director, but basically you are the only one still interested in the business stuff?
Yeah, I guess, although now that we are still a VOF, which is pretty crazy to some people. We're a VOF of 7. It is possible. It's not recommended, but it is possible. If you don't constantly fight over business decisions. Yeah. And it's not that we're suppressing those fights, it's just that we entrusted, in this case me, to just focus on the business side. Because a VOF gives you a lot of freedom to, and a lot of ability to dynamically, move around based on what your project needs and what your company needs. Right. But right now we're looking into actually going to a BV because now that Pine is done, we know that we have a future. And at that point, the others want to be a bit more involved in the business side of things as well, because they feel like that's their responsibility.
So you had kind of a slow start, or not a slow start, but you started with 2, then someone gradually you grew. Did that change anything when you had tough decisions to make about where you wanted to go, or was that always entrusted into you and everybody followed? Did you have a decision-making process at that time?
Well, it was never, especially the expansion of the company was never a very diligent decision of let's try to find someone who can join us. Mm-hmm. It was more that we always had friends and especially colleagues from school around us who were interested in what we were doing. And whenever we got an opportunity, we asked them to join us. So we knew them for a very long time. We did a lot of school projects with them. So still the 7 that are here together, we all know each other from school. So that's, I guess, a bit different than, going out and going to a job site.
All of you have partially the same background,
Yeah,
same
exactly,
kind of
yeah.
age range,
Yeah.
same kind of... all
Which
right.
I now do see as kind of a weakness of our company as well. I would love to be a bit more diverse.
Yeah.
And we can notice that sometimes in the creative process.
Why? What do you think? What do you notice?
Well, I guess just the general benefits of diversity is just having a very different opinion or a different voice in something. And I'm pretty aware of it, so that already helps a little bit. But I can see how it's quite dangerous for a company of 7 just guys from the same age, from the same school, same background. I mean, we're from different countries, but even then, we're all from Europe-ish.
Yeah.
So, yeah, it just, I feel like there could have been a few more flavors to everything we make if we have a bit more diversity. But right now, we're not in the like, we don't have the possibility to do that easily.
Right.
But it's just something for the future plan, basically.
And when you were just starting out and it's gradually growing, did you have a kind of a clear goal in mind, or was it always just whatever you needed at the time? So, or were you already talking together about a vision going forward, or was it never something that came up?
It was quite the first thing that you mentioned. So it was quite chaotic in that sense.
Mm-hmm.
And I wouldn't use actually chaotic maybe, because it was more that we knew that this could fail at any point. But any opportunity that we could take to make it like go on, we just took.
Yeah.
So it was always very opportunity based, and we didn't have a initial investment or something that said, okay, you can go on for 4 years. No, especially Pine was enormous stepping stone process. So, and at any point, we had to make sure that the risk was not within ourselves and that we weren't creating a debt of a few €100,000.
Yeah.
But that the risk was always in a different party, or at least no legal risk was involved. And that was the only way to build Pine and to like finish Pine with that, in that sense.
And we'll talk about that later.
Yeah.
Just one more follow-up question is that now you have 7 people that you need to pay every month.
Yeah, although we're still paying ourselves because it's a vennootschap. So we are all owners of this, or like vennoten in this business.
But nobody does anything else on the side,
no,
right?
It's all full-time.
So they're all full-time.
Yeah.
Is this a time where you do have to worry more about mission vision going forward and think about what you really want? Yeah.
Yeah, because if you want to think about expansion and everything, we don't want more vennoten, that's obvious. Yeah. So you'll have to think about employees and all that stuff, and that's a very different structure from what we are used to, and also different financial situation, because having employees just costs a bit more, right, per employee. Right now we are this super free organ of like, we can pay ourselves whatever we want, and if there's a few rough months like near release and we want to save up some money for some extra stuff, then we just lower our salaries, in agreement. And
but going forward, that's going to be harder and harder.
Yeah, exactly. And it's not exactly a competitive salary that we've had for this whole time.
Exactly.
So now is the time to really, budget on what a healthy company or like a normal company with employees would have.
And do you have any idea how you're going to do that? Just sit around together and have these discussions?
Yeah, that's basically what we're doing.
Going to get some help?
Yeah, we had an enormous post-mortem process on Pine.
Okay.
That was one of the first things, like for 1.5 weeks, just everyday meetings all day long, which sounds pretty counterproductive, but it was amazing to have this sort of fresh, like breath of fresh air throughout the office and just talking about all the things that bothered us. And we ended it with 1 day of the personal feedback sessions, which was pretty tough, and we were doubting how to do that and how to structure that. But really per person, just have personal like things that were bothering or like obstructing communication. And it took us until 5 a.m. in the morning with a lot of beer involved as well, but not that much that we didn't remember it afterwards. That would have been kind of a waste. But we had to create this really nice ambience, this really nice vibes that you can be really honest and not take it all personally, but actually look at it from a business perspective. Because obviously the 7 of us, we come from the same background. We're good friends. Like we do a lot of things together. So we needed to have that separation going into a new project to make sure that we started off fresh and on a business level, basically.
Cool. Yeah, this to me is a very interesting topic. We could continue this much more, but we're going to go back in time a little bit.
Sure.
So you started at some point, what became Pine was a student project. Yeah. Right? And then, well, I was going to say famously, but you went to Kickstarter to ask people to, spend money on you and on the project. And that went pretty well, right?
Yeah. for sure.
How did you approach Kickstarter? Did you spend a lot of time on that? You don't have to go into super detail, but did you spend a lot of time before launch?
Well, I was quite opposed to the idea of Kickstarter at first.
Okay, why?
I don't know. I just had this sense that maybe a lot of other people here have as well. Like, Kickstarter, there's a lot of games that didn't come out really well on Kickstarter. There's a lot of community things to manage. It's quite a hassle.
Yeah.
But then we realized quickly after making that prototype for graduation, like, oh, this is a game that gets a lot of automatic attention, as I always called it. Like, it was very easy to share and sell this game to people. Then we got a Unity Award for the best student project in Los Angeles, and we noticed, okay, there's something about this that people just seem to like from the first glance. So crowdfunding makes a lot of sense in this regard. Plus, it was a perfect structure for us because Kickstarter is all or nothing, right? And that's exactly this position we were in. We weren't paying ourselves until the Kickstarter, so between school and Kickstarter. So we could really have a moment where either this was a green light to keep going and there's something in it, or we just stop and that's it.
Yeah, so it's basically a pretty low risk situation where you could just try it out and see what happens.
Yeah, and also importantly, even if the Kickstarter did make it, you have no legal obligation to deliver. Obviously, you have a big moral obligation, and like your brand and everything is kind of ruined if you then don't.
Yeah.
But it was important for us that 6 young guys at that point that we weren't like legally very screwed if this would not work out in the end. And in total, I think we spent about 8 months preparing the Kickstarter because
the Kickstarter.
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it went from a very, well, in retrospect, ugly school prototype to like a visual pitch of what needed to be a fully functional open world game. So a lot of that time was just spent on obviously making the features and the content for like the visual pitch and for the game. And then most of that time went into making a trailer or like a 6-minute video of this is what Bind is going to be. And that had to be at a certain level.
And so the promise of that video was already a fully functioning open world game?
Yes.
What was the promise? What were you selling?
Yeah, so the promise was that we would build a world that was continuous, right? So a world inhabited by AI actors that would have lives and goals of their own. And you as a player could influence those lives, and the quest would be revolved around like influencing their lives and making sure that the table was set to your advantage, basically. But these are pretty abstract ideas. We had a lot of sort of technical visualizations and technical proofs of concept of the loose parts of it. But we obviously didn't have enough time in 8 months to build this whole fully fledged world. So that was, I think, creatively the biggest risk that we took. It's like knowing what parts need to be made and then...
Did you have an estimate of how much time you were going to need to build that?
To be completely frank, we knew it was going to be at least like 2 years from the moment we did the Kickstarter. So this was in April 2017. But we knew that putting the estimated date on the Kickstarter to be somewhere in 2019 would have hurt our campaign a lot.
Okay.
So we looked at our scope and thought, okay, absolute best case, we could finish this at the end of 2018. And at least it will have the 2018 stamp in it, which for people is a mental image of like, that's a year.
Yeah.
Even though that's already almost like 2 years.
Pricing something at $2.99 where it's actually $3.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. It's a bit of a psychological effect there. But we knew this was probably going to be delayed. But we also saw that if we just keep our backers really informed throughout the whole process, they're going to be okay with any delay as long as they get something.
And what did you ask for? What amount was the goal?
100,000 euros.
And what did you get?
121,000 euros.
All right. Yeah. So kind of matched. Kickstarter fees and everything.
Yeah, I mean, basically you barely make a Kickstarter just on the amount you ask. You always go over it quite a bit, or you just don't make it at all. Yeah. So this is a fairly healthy, normal campaign.
And you were obviously happy with that?
Yeah.
And were you able to make what you wanted to make within that budget? Because at some point...
No, not at all. But we already knew that. It was also on the Kickstarter page, so we were always pretty transparent on that. I don't think a lot of people cared about it or read about it because it was still a surprise to some people that we got a publisher afterwards. But we already knew, okay, from the moment the Kickstarter was there, that's when I started talking to publishers. Yeah. Because I knew this money, if we got 108K after the Kickstarter fees and whatnot, There is income tax or like profit tax over this in the Netherlands once you deliver your product. So we only paid that like a week ago because now all the games have been sent out basically.
Yeah.
But yeah, you get left with somewhere in the 80,000, 90,000 euro range.
Yeah.
Well, with 7 people, that's not a lot. So we knew that pretty quickly we would have to get a publisher who would fill up the rest.
And you started talking to publishers during the Kickstarter campaign already, or
Actually,
after
before.
you knew before already?
Yeah.
Okay.
We did some talks at some conference, I think in Berlin. It was Casual Connect, I believe. A lot of weird talks with mobile companies who were asking if it was going to be Android or iOS, who clearly didn't see the actual game. But we started talking to our actual publisher in the end there for the first time. And apparently I gave the impression that if the Kickstarter would be all right, that we wouldn't need a publisher for some reason. I don't know how I did that, but after the campaign, they were very surprised that I reached out because they said, well, your Kickstarter worked, right? So you wouldn't need a publisher. And I said, no, we definitely still do. It's just a nice extra boost for us and like a good community thing. And they were the best option we had.
You were already going out there and giving talks before ever having released the game, or why did you do that? Why did you choose to go out there and have talks?
Well, if you talk about like the plans that we had for Pine and the vision, there wasn't much to go on except for a few like core pillars, and one of them was that if we make a game like this, we shouldn't be releasing this ourselves, because if a good publisher has something like this in their hands, they can do so much more than we can do as a debut game, basically, right? Because, you know, you got to kind of ignore the mobile game there. So for sure, we wanted to work with a partner or someone who could bring this, like take this to a better level. Plus, again, we wanted to build this whole thing very risk averse. So one of the ways to do that is to put the risk, or at least a shared risk, in the publisher. Yeah.
You were also already going out to conferences and meeting people far before. That was kind of what I was referring to.
No, that's just to sell the game as well. And like that one in February was a month before the Kickstarter. So that was to sell the Kickstarter as well. We knew we were going to do it.
Did you always have that in mind? So we have to start selling even before the Kickstarter goes live?
Yeah, for sure.
Why?
One of the most important things for me personally as a designer / producer / business person is that every step of the way, everything you decide, you have to remember that you're making a product more than anything else. So you can make the best designed system in the world, but if it's so niche that nobody's going to see it, then why do it? Some might see that as sort of a capitalist approach, but I still think you can make very cool, creative games with considering that you always will have to sell and like earn your money with it. So this was also a reason why very early on in the process, we were very openly sharing everything about the project and basically screaming to people, this is what we were trying to make, just to help us with the Kickstarter, with the publisher, and like show that it has potential, basically.
So you ended up with a partner, publisher. Yeah. Who was that?
Congregate.
Why did you end up with Congregate?
Yeah, it's a very weird choice because they are well known for their like Flash platform online and their free to play games and all that stuff. And here we were with like a big 3D action adventure, open world title. Yeah, I would be lying if I would say that this was just like we could pick whoever. Obviously, we pitched quite a bit. We talked to Devolver, for example, but they just said, well, it's cool, but it's not in our category, which I can totally see. But, you know, you want to try Devolver anyway, right? Mm-hmm. Humble Bundle is also one we tried, and they just held off because they saw the risk in it, which was enormous. Yeah. Because, again, we just had loose like systems. Even in the proof of concept, it didn't all gel together as it did in the end. So, and Congregate was actually the only one who read our 148-page GDD to like the greatest detail, and they asked the questions about all the design stuff that was in there, because that was all they had to go on and that we had to go on, just the full detailed plan of what Pine was going to be. And if we didn't have the GDD, then they would have just had to take it from like videos and ideas and me talking about it. But we wanted to show that we did think about every step of the way. We just needed someone to help us make it, basically. Right. And Congregate was so insightful about everything. And they were making like the first step into premium games. We were like, well, they basically said, well, this is a huge risk. I mean, here's a young team, right, who want to make this absolutely crazy game that makes no sense, but on paper, I guess it does. Yeah. But who are we to keep you from doing that? And why shouldn't we help you? Because if this does work out, it's going to sell well. And then we thought, well, who are we to work with a publisher who doesn't have any premium experience? Well, let's just work together.
It's a match made in heaven.
Yeah, basically. And they are just the nicest people. That was like that was a very important part for me. Like a lot of the talks that I had started with, okay, so how is this going to make money? But their talk started with, oh, we love that design on the trading that you did, and how is that going to influence the economy in this part of the island? And like, whoa, you actually read it and you actually think about it. That's so cool.
Something that spoke to you. So once you guys, Twirlbound and Congregate decided, hey, this is something that we, want to work together.
Yeah.
How long did it take for that to actually end up with a contract and something signed?
Yeah, I believe, because this I get asked a lot, I believe it was 4 months in total from the first real conversation to signing a contract.
That's pretty quick, right?
It is pretty quick, but then we already had a meeting in February earlier that year, so he knew about the idea. I mean, if you take that into account, it's 13 months, but that whole time in between, we didn't really talk. So it was pretty quick, although it didn't feel that quick because it was like, it needs to happen now or it doesn't happen. Right, the Kickstarter money after a year was definitely running out. We already were lowering our salaries quite a bit,
right,
to the bare survival point, which is fine. But we needed a publisher.
Right.
But you also don't want to show your desperation to the publisher, because then they're just going to take advantage of that. Whoever it is, they're just going to think, okay, they really need us.
They're going to try and get the best deal.
Yeah. So we had to pretend that we had all the choice in the world.
Yeah. And is there anything about the project or the company that you had to change to accommodate any of their wishes?
No, not at all, actually. I mean, we kept the IP. We had we could do whatever we wanted with the project. They were only there to give feedback, so we got all the freedom in that. But one thing we used them for is to ask the 7th person into the team, which was Ilya, which was he's the now, I guess, main designer on our project. And Ilya was working at Ubisoft on Assassin's Creed, and before that at Horizon, like at Guerrilla on Horizon. And that was exactly the open world quest experience we needed for our game. And he was a good friend of ours from school. So that was a perfect moment to ask the publisher for just a bit more money without even being explicit about it.
Yeah, so they didn't help you get him on the team?
No, exactly. We just needed the funding to get an extra person in, because we didn't have that, and we just asked for a bit more, and then we could expand the team with him.
And you had like just regular feedback moments with Congregant, and that's about it.
Yeah, just weekly calls on the status of everything, and they helped us get into Nintendo Direct and everything. So they did their part, and we just said what was happening to the game.
Right.
And then you get payments per milestone. So on those milestone moments, you get feedback from them.
Okay.
Or we could just throw that feedback away as well if you wanted, but obviously it's helpful. It's like extra QA.
Yeah. And those milestones were all determined after every milestone, or was that something that you set up?
No, that was something in the contract. Like, that was very important, that you know what the overall planning is of everything. And that was one of the biggest risks we took, because at that point we didn't have Ilya yet, and Ilya knew everything about the open world stuff, and we were kind of in the dark on some parts of it, especially the questing. Questing in an open world that constantly changes is not fun, I can tell you. And Ilya had some ideas, but he basically thought of them after we signed all the milestones, which were then based on something we didn't really know how it was going to pan out. And that's where the chaos kind of began, because you kind of need to fit into these milestones if you want to survive. Also create a trust relationship with the publisher. So especially the first 4 or 5 milestones you really just want to hit. And then you can ask for like extensions or whatever, changes within the milestones after they know that you can at least deliver what you want.
And were they like bi-monthly milestones? Like,
roughly, yeah.
Right.
I mean, they weren't tailored to that, but that's how it ended up, like 6 to 8 weeks for milestones.
Did you, did anything in the company change, like the way you worked, other than working towards those milestones? But did everybody ramp up? Did stuff change, the way you make decisions, the way you approached it after this was finalized?
We kind of ramped down.
Okay.
That's super weird, but we're very anti-crunch if we can help it. The only one who really ramped up from moment one was Ilya, but that was because he came from AAA and he said, I have one shot at joining an indie company and making something that I really want to make. So he said, I'm going to spend all my time I can, and I want to put this in. And he never felt bad about it, but that was just him. And the rest of us were growing a bit tired of this constant running behind the milestones. So we tried to just keep everything very sane, and only, on real deadline days it could get a bit crazy.
Right. And like after or during this time, what did Congregate do? Maybe talking to other partners, platforms, that kind of thing, to expand your player base, or
So the main thing they did was put Sony, Microsoft, and Nintendo against each other and like see who's gonna bid us something to go to that platform.
Right.
Because contractually we decided to launch on PC and a console. So to decide that console, we just tried to get the best deal out of any of the platform holders.
And that's something that for you wouldn't have been possible.
No, I didn't know anyone, or at least I had some loose like contacts and emails from basic networking, but nothing concrete, and especially not high up enough, right? So they just like put them against each other, and the main one we all wanted to go for was Nintendo, because that at that point, and I still think it is, like the Switch was the main thing you want to really be on, especially if Nintendo is behind that. And then Nintendo offered us a place in the Nintendo Direct as long as we launched on Switch for 90 days exclusively, which is totally fine, because we said, well, we're not going to be able to make a PlayStation and Xbox version in 90 days anyway, so let's go. So we did that, and that was a huge boost, obviously, for all of our channels. Switch release is a whole different story. But
I was going to say, like, PC and Switch didn't release at the same time?
No, in the end, they didn't. Basically, when the Nintendo thing came up, we said to Congregate, this is going to be the most hellish port you can imagine for any game you can imagine. Because an open world action adventure game, that's tough. Like Nintendo does it in combination with the team behind Xenoblade, and then Xenoblade does it. There's not a lot of other games that try to do it without any loading and whatnot. But then there was the whole simulation aspect in the background, which is CPU heavy, like a constant, like just a continuous world. So we said, this is going to be tough, and we're not going to be the ones to do it. There's no time for that. So in the end, we couldn't release simultaneously. So the Switch version became later, and even then it was at like 70% of what it should have been.
Okay.
And that was very tough, and it still is quite tough, because the launch was just super rough, and the version on Switch is super rough. Still a lot of people enjoying it, and it's selling really well on Switch, which is strange, but that's how they're, they don't have a rating system or anything, so that can happen.
Yeah.
But it's really weird. But that has been rough since the start, but we're just patching it ourselves now, actually, since it came out in November, and it's getting better and better. It just takes a lot of time, and we need to balance that with the new project.
So you just mentioned a new project. So going forward, you still have obligations towards How are you going to balance that?
I don't know.
Okay.
No, that's what we're trying to figure out now in a very healthy way. Because obviously stuff like porting and bug fixes, that's mainly the programmers, and a bit of design work or like content work. But they're also the ones to carry the first bits of the prototype, or at least after the basic design, right?
Yeah.
And art can function on a sort of separate island with like pre-production stuff. But we need the programmers for both, and we only have two. So basically right now, one programmer is doing a lot of work on Pine still, like making patches and working with that, and the other one is doing a lot on the prototyping. But we got to make sure that we don't kill the motivation, because you don't want to work on a finished project every time while the rest is making new cool stuff. Right? So
and when thinking about new projects, so you don't have to like spoil anything yet, but did you take into account, like, this is the company we have, this is the kind of people we have to make sure that the new project will use our strengths? Or did you just go for the biggest, baddest idea that you had?
No, it's exactly that. Like, we didn't want to make a Pine sequel. Everyone was very clear about that, because it had so many ideas, and even building on top of that would mean just going back to the drawing board and see how in the end we would have actually structured it in a normal game development process. But there are some things in Pine, like we are trained to do like high-end stuff, right? So 3D for sure. Kind of big in terms of world and scale and scope. That's fine. We are trained to do AAA stuff, so that's what we're applying to smaller games or like indie games. So for sure that was something we wanted to do. And third person action adventure is also something we really like, because that's just, it doesn't happen that much in indie. So if you can do it, it's kind of like a technical niche almost. So we just push for that. And that's what we're doing. And we're prototyping our ideas only in that sort of
All right.
hemisphere.
And when you, same question, but just looking at the company going forward, is that something that you talk about? Like, we want to grow to X amount of people, or are you fine as you are? What's your vision there?
We're kind of looking at it on a situation basis now. We know that the process for making Pine, so a lack of pre-production, always rushing to like either a marketing deadline or a milestone that wasn't properly defined. We basically don't know if the 7 of us just can make a good game with a normal process, if that makes sense, right? So if you have a starting, like a base to start on, you have some funding, you don't have to worry for at least like a year to like figure out where you're going to get the next funding. Then how does pre-production actually work with the 7 of us? We know how it should theoretically work, but the first thing we need to do is just figure out our processes and our planning, and just basically go back to the drawing board on the structure of what we're doing. And that's most important. And then after that, if we find a new publisher, because that's very likely for this new project, at least that we need to look for one, at that point, we're going to look at, okay, can we ask again for more money to expand it a little bit and get some external people in?
Because I can imagine like 7 is a reasonable size. If you start growing even more, like past 10, your job might become more might become different. Like, and there won't be any more creative in front of that job title.
That's very that's a big decision we need to make. We've had like 3 interns at some point. That was 10 people, and obviously, you know, their interns is a bit different, but even then it was very hard to get all the meetings going, and it became a bit mushy everywhere because we didn't think about it that much. So that's definitely a conscious decision we need to make. So either I need to decide to go full business, or at least mostly business, or we need to find someone for that, and I go back to a bit more creative stuff. But I've come to notice that I really like the business stuff as well. And Ilya is such a good designer that I can leave all the design stuff to him if necessary, but I just like to pitch in. That's kind of the structure right now. So I'd be fine with that. It's just that growing in general is so difficult, I think. Like, just the people you
it
find.
Seems like it's something that you're at least aware of. That you need to make sure. All right. And otherwise, we're going to have to ask you back again. If anybody wants to ask questions, this would be the time.
Hi.
Nathan Daniels from Longest Road Studios. I was wondering about your process for your Kickstarter preparations.
Well, we had this sort of vision for the game, and I just made a sort of sketch of what are examples of gameplay that would convey the idea and that would show the world that we're trying to create. And through those little ideas, if you combine them, that was basically a trailer. So for that trailer, for each specific idea, we would just have to visually prototype that part, even if it was just a few seconds, as long as we could show what it was going to be like, right? So flying with a glider that didn't make it in the end, or running through a cave that wasn't there in the end. That was fine. At least the idea was like conveyed of what our vision was at that moment. So the decisions that we made was always, it was based on what is the game going to look like. And we focused on the parts that we could make a quick visual prototype of, that we could combine in the trailer to show to other people. So it was like a parallel of figuring out the game stuff in combination with the marketing stuff. So the priority was always just, okay, we have to work on the game, obviously. And there's some dependencies there, like a terrain system that just needs to be made, but like it's going to take a while. So we first focus on like the interior parts that don't need the terrain system, and we just make like the scenes for that and like some art for it, maybe some concept art or some paint overs or whatnot. And then in parallel, the game was being made, basically like the base of it. So once we had the terrain, we could do all the outdoor scenes and like build the assets on top of that. So it was always a bit of a back and forth of like, we have to progress this game in the upcoming 8 months, but we also have to sell parts of it. So you're just working on the base while polishing small 2-second bits of it so that you can show that to anyone, basically.
Okay, and was like one of the reasons why it took 8 months also because you needed to program like a lot of mechanic stuff?
For sure. Basically, the content that we were making for the game, we didn't want to waste it on a visual prototype, so we made it for real, knowing that was going to be in. In the end, that's where you kind of skip the whole pre-production part of it, because you quickly need something for a visual prototype, and we ended up just using that, and we're lucky that it was all pretty good. Like, okay, it has enough quality. It's not like a throwaway thing. But that meant that it took about 8 months to make it, but also that there's almost no way back. Like, this is what you're stuck with. In the end, that was fine because we made good decisions I guess. But that was always a difficult part. Like you just constantly build and market at the same time.
So basically, as an advice, just go for simple mechanics, so you don't have to spend that much time.
Yeah, for sure. And also, I guess just do a bit of pre-production if you can on anything you want to kickstart, because our pre-production was basically our preparation. So instead of sitting around deciding what we want to make, that was kind of almost on the spot every time. So step by step. And then you end up with a Kickstarter that is exactly what you want to make because you've already sort of made it. But yeah, if we had a bit more time, a bit more funding, I would have probably done it differently, I guess.
Okay. So, and as a follow-up question, like at what point did you actually finish the game design document? Because
never. It just rots away basically. But for the publisher, that's the only thing that sold the game to the publishers. And basically it was a guidebook for the team to make the basic like mechanics on all sides. And I think roughly around summer of 2018, so that's like 1.5 years before release, that's when we stopped writing because all the features were in there. And any iteration, any change we made, which were sometimes super big, we just wrote in like separate documents, or we didn't write down at all. We just worked on top of whatever was there. Basically, it was a document to outline the whole thing in very great detail. But I think it becomes useless at GTD when you have to tweak all the like, how the character needs to run 4 units instead of 5. Well, don't go back to the GTD and change that, or don't put it in to begin with. But to convey an idea and convince someone that you have thought about everything, that was the only way for us to do it. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you. Hello.
Hi, Arjan Miedema, Bullet Whale Games. You talked about you going 8 months for the whole Kickstarter process and basically having these small visual parts. How did you playtest during that time? Because how it sounds is that there's a lot of different mechanics and parts and features. How do you decide what's fun?
Well, the scariest risk that we took is that we built all these separate mechanics and separate systems, and we gave them quite a bit of fluff because we knew how to do that, and they were quite pretty. But then you could only playtest those like loose parts. And then after the Kickstarter, we worked on a demo to sort of combine them all. But even then, it didn't have the fully fledged simulation system because that just took 1.5 years or something to really come to fruition. Let alone the quest system, which took 2 years almost. So it wasn't until the start of 2019, basically, that everything for the first time came together, and we were basically praying that it was as fun as it was on paper, which is crazy, and I wouldn't ever recommend to anyone. And that's also the reason why pretty soon into development, we knew this was not going to be a 10 out of 10 game, but it was going to be a game that we were going to be able to finish, which is a decision we just basically made. But playtesting was always very hard, always only the loose parts and knowing that, okay, it's cool to do this, it's cool to do this. Theoretically, on paper, this combines well, etc. But right now with the new project, we're really focusing on a much more compact core that we can play from like 1 month in and then keep playing for every week, because that was the most dangerous thing we've ever done, I think. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Hello.
Hi, I'm Gabriel from Red Bull Studios. My question is, it seems like you guys formed your company from the university. Did you actually have a business plan? Did you have your scope in mind from the start? Or was it something that grew to a point that you realized, wow, it's a big project. It requires a lot of money.
Yeah, well, business plans I've never been really big on, so we didn't really have that, but also because the company already existed, I guess. So we never had to convince anyone of our company. We only had to convince people of our game. We kind of knew from the start, like, this is not going to be a small game ever. If you look at similar open world projects, it's always like 6-7 years and whatnot. Obviously, ours was going to be a bit smaller, so we were thinking 3 or 4 years in total. That should kind of do the trick. But the game did evolve a lot over the course of making it. The only thing we always knew, the constant, was that it was big, and we had no misconception of that. Like, we never thought this is a small party game or whatever. It's just that planning-wise, it made it very hard because some of the concepts, like especially the questing system and the simulation, we didn't really have anything to go on because the simulation was completely new, and the questing on top of that was also completely new. And that came after signing the milestone, so that was a very risky part of it. But it never exploded in terms of scope creep, like, oh, now we really don't know what to do with this anymore. if anything, we only shaved off because the ideas were big from the beginning. So we kind of knew what we were in for, but not how big exactly, I guess.
Yeah. You never had a moment that you had to take a full U-turn and say, okay, this is way too much for us to chew.
Yeah, it was mainly that when the idea came up, somebody enthusiastically going, hey, we could do it. Nope, we're not doing that. Like, it was just from the start, we would always cut everything down because we were already way over scoped. So the only thing that happened was scope things down, like leave things out or change some systems in a slightly minor way. But yeah, it was always big. So that helped our mindset of like, this can almost blow up because it already did, kind of.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Looking back at everything, like, what is your biggest regret?
My biggest regret. Oh, that's actually interesting. I thought of a lot of questions, but not of that one. Because I don't really regret anything, to be honest. If that's an answer, that's also possible.
Absolutely.
There are a lot of minor, like, there's a lot of creative things I regret, but that
stuff that didn't make it into the game.
Yeah, or stuff that did in a way that it shouldn't have. But we've talked about that in the post-mortem with each other a lot, and I think it's too much for a talk like this. Like, it's too much in detail. So mostly some creative things I was like, really should have done it differently, as everyone always has, right?
Yeah.
But business-wise, I mean, it was a really crazy venture, and I would never do it again like this with the sort of stepping stones in a project that's way too big, but it did get attention because that was kind of the balance that we made.
No regrets. That's cool.
So actually no regrets because all we got is, well, it made quite a bit of money. That's nice, I guess. But also just the experience of doing all these facets, from Kickstarter to publisher to just creating an open world action adventure game, like even creatively, all the aspects involved in this game have some relevance to any other game almost. Like, there's so much stuff in it that all there is left is just we learned a lot from it and we delivered and it's there. And
Well, then the other side of the question is, what are you most happy with?
That it miraculously finished, I guess. Like, that something's there to play.
All right.
That's not complete garbage. There are a lot of flaws in it, but there's also a lot of people who really love getting lost in our world, and I think that's cool that we finished it somehow.
All right.
Yeah.
That's it for today's incubation talk at Dutch Game Garden. I'd like to thank Matthijs for your insights. I'd like to thank you for watching. Thank you very much, Matthijs.
Thank you.